The alien who feared love. On the distant planet of Velixia, under a sky filled with 3 glowing moons, a young alien girl named Lyra walked alone through the quiet forest. She was small, with soft silver skin and large violet eyes that reflected the stars above. Her people, the Velmeri, believed in logic, strength, and survival. Love was a weakness. Since childhood, Lyra had been taught that emotions made people fragile. Feelings like love, kindness, and attachment were dangerous. The Velmeri believed that love could break minds, weaken warriors, and lead to destruction. Lyra had never questioned this, until the night a human spaceship crashed near her village. She had seen the explosion in the sky, a bright fireball streaking down, shaking the ground when it landed. Her people had ignored it. "It is not our concern," the elders said. But Lyra's heart, though trained to be cold, whispered a different thought. What if someone was inside? What if they needed help? Curiosity and something deep inside her, something she did not understand, pushed her forward. The mysterious stranger. Lyra moved swiftly through the thick, glowing trees, her feet silent on the soft ground. She reached the crash site and saw the wreckage of a strange metal craft, half buried in the earth. Smoke rose from it, and among the debris, a figure lay still. It was a human. Lyra had only heard stories of humans. Some Velmeri said they were violent. Others claimed they were too emotional and weak. But the human in front of her looked neither violent nor weak. He looked broken. His body was covered in cuts and bruises, his clothes torn, and his breathing was shallow. His golden brown hair was matted with blood. Yet even as he lay there, unconscious, his face looked peaceful. Lyra hesitated. Helping him was against the laws of her people. If anyone found out, she would be punished. Her people might even kill him. She should leave. She should forget him. But she couldn't. Something inside her refused to let her turn away. A dangerous choice. Lyra knelt beside the human. His breathing was uneven. His wounds were deep, but he was still alive. He needed help. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers barely grazing his arm. His skin was warm, unlike the cool skin of the Velmeri. He stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering, and a soft groan escaped his lips. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt something else. Concern. Lyra pulled back sharply. Concern. No, she couldn't feel that. Emotions were forbidden. Love was impossible. She clenched her jaw. No, she was not feeling. She was simply being logical. If he died here, his body would attract wild creatures. If someone else found him, they might blame her for his presence. It was better to hide him. Yes, that was the smart decision. Ignoring the voice in her head that whispered she was lying to herself, she carefully pulled his arm over her shoulder. He was heavy, much heavier than a Velmeri, but she was strong. With great effort, she dragged him toward the shadows of the trees, where no one would find him. The first sign of change. By the time she reached her hidden cave, Lyra was exhausted. She laid the human down on soft moss and quickly gathered supplies: water from the stream, healing salve from her satchel, and cloth to clean his wounds. As she worked, she studied him. His face was different from hers, rougher, stronger, yet strangely gentle. His breathing had steadied, and his hands, though bruised, looked like they had once been skilled at something. Suddenly, his fingers twitched, his lips parted, and a single word escaped. "Where am I?" Lyra froze. His voice was low, soft yet strong. It sent a strange feeling through her chest, like a ripple in calm water. The human's eyes slowly opened. They were a deep shade of blue, bright and clear. And in them, Lyra saw something she had never seen before. Warmth. Not fire, not danger, just warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stared at each other, two souls from different worlds, caught in a moment that should not exist. Then, weakly, he smiled. and Lyra's world changed forever. A forbidden connection. The human's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep blue orbs that shimmered in the dim cave light. He was awake, but weak. Lyra, crouched nearby, tensed as he tried to move, his breath shaky and uneven. "Where am I?" he rasped, blinking up at the uneven ceiling of the cave. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her mind raced. She had saved him, against her people's laws, against her own beliefs. Now what? She should leave him here, let him recover on his own. But as she stared at his exhausted face, at the pain etched into his features, she knew she wouldn't. The human turned his head slowly, spotting her. His gaze softened, though confusion clouded his expression. "You saved me," he whispered. Lyra hesitated, then gave a small nod. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something else. But then he coughed, a rough, painful sound. Without thinking, Lyra grabbed a small wooden bowl filled with water from the nearby rock and held it out. He reached for it, but his hands were trembling. He was too weak. With a sigh, Lyra lifted the bowl to his lips and tilted it slightly. He drank in slow, careful sips. "Why am I doing this?" Lyra thought. "This is wrong." Yet, she didn't stop. The strangeness of a human. As the human's breathing steadied, Lyra sat back, watching him carefully. She had never been this close to a human before. His skin was rough compared to her smooth, silver complexion. His features were sharp yet oddly soft at the same time. Humans were known to be too emotional, too fragile. And yet, despite his injuries, this one was alive, surviving, enduring. Lyra wanted to ask him questions. Why was he here? How did he crash? Why did he look at her with such warmth? But she stayed silent. Instead, the human spoke first. "I'm Ethan." Lyra stiffened. A name. She shouldn't know his name. Knowing his name meant knowing him. Knowing him meant attachment. She shouldn't ask. She shouldn't care. But her lips moved on their own. "Lyra." Ethan smiled. It was small, weak, but genuine. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." Nice to meet her. No one had ever said that before. The Velmari didn't greet each other like that. They spoke in efficiency, in duty, in logic, not in warmth. Lyra looked away, feeling something strange stir inside her chest. The unspoken rules. As the hours passed, Ethan grew stronger. Lyra brought him fruits from the nearby forest and applied the healing salve to his wounds. He winced but never complained. "How long have I been here?" he asked one evening. 2 nights, Lyra replied simply. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his messy golden-brown hair. "Dan, my crew must think I'm dead." "Your crew?" Lyra frowned. Ethan nodded. "I was part of a scouting mission. My ship got hit by debris near the atmosphere. I ejected before the crash. I think the main ship survived, but I don't know if they're looking for me." Lyra's chest tightened at his words. If his crew was looking, it meant more humans would come. More humans meant more danger. "You should leave soon," she said, standing. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you want me to leave?" Lyra froze. Of course she did. She had to. If anyone from her village found out about him, she would be punished, exiled, maybe even executed. But she looked at him, at his tired yet gentle face, at the way his hands rested on his lap, not as a warrior, not as a threat, but as someone who trusted her. She swallowed hard. "Yes." Ethan chuckled, a sound so unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. "You don't sound sure." Lyra frowned. "I am sure." Ethan smirked, closing his eyes briefly. "Then why did you save me?" Lyra's breath hitched. She had no answer. Suspicion and fear. The next morning, Lyra was awakened by the distant sound of voices. She bolted upright. Velmari hunters. Her people were near. If they found Ethan, If they found her with him, it would mean death. "Stay here," she whispered sharply, turning to Ethan. "Do not make a sound." Ethan frowned. "What's wrong?" "Just do it," she hissed before slipping outside the cave. The forest was quiet, except for the low murmurs of two Velmeri hunters. Lyra pressed herself against a tree, listening carefully. "Strange footprints near the crash site," one of them said. Her blood ran cold. They were tracking Ethan. "We should report this," the other said. "If a human is alive, we must destroy it before it brings more." Lyra clenched her fists. Destroy it. That's all Ethan was to them. A threat. A mistake that needed to be erased. She turned back to the cave, heart pounding. If they searched further, they would find him. She had a choice. Betray him and stay safe, or protect him and risk everything. She thought about Ethan's blue eyes, the way he smiled, the way he said her name like it mattered. Lyra took a deep breath. She had already made her choice the moment she pulled him from the wreckage. Now she just had to make sure she didn't regret it. When fear and love collide, the forest was too quiet. Lyra could hear the sharp footsteps of the Velmeri hunters moving closer. Their voices were low, filled with suspicion, but she knew better than to underestimate them. The Velmeri were excellent trackers. They never stopped until they found what they were looking for. And right now, they were looking for Ethan. Her heart pounded. She had to act fast. Taking a slow breath, she turned back toward the cave, moving swiftly and silently. Ethan was sitting up now, still weak but alert. The moment he saw her expression, his face tensed. "What's wrong?" he whispered. Lyra pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for him to stay silent. Then she crouched beside him, speaking in a voice so low it was barely audible. "They're searching for you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How close?" Lyra's violet eyes flickered toward the entrance of the cave. "Close enough. We don't have much time." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lyra could see the gears turning in Ethan's mind, but she already knew what he was thinking. He wanted to fight. Humans fought for their survival, didn't they? But fighting was suicide. If the hunters found him, they wouldn't ask questions. They wouldn't hesitate. They would kill him where he stood. Ethan took a breath. "Then let's go." Lyra froze. "Go?" Ethan nodded, struggling to stand. His legs wobbled, but he pushed himself upright, using the cave wall for support. "I can't just sit here and wait to die," he murmured. "If they're coming, we need to leave." Lyra's mind raced. The idea of fleeing with a human was reckless, impossible. Where would they go? How would she hide him forever? And yet, a small voice inside her whispered, "You already made your choice. You saved him. You can't stop now." She swallowed hard. "Follow me." A desperate escape. Moving as fast as they could, Lyra guided Ethan through the hidden trails of the forest. The luminescent trees glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows around them. The ground was damp from the night's rain, making it harder for Ethan to move without slipping. She grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Be quiet," she whispered. Ethan smirked despite the situation. "I'll try." But as they moved deeper into the forest, Lyra could feel the hunters getting closer. The Velmeri could sense disturbances in the environment. They would soon realize she was missing. She needed to think of something. Then an idea struck her. The Black River. It was one of the most dangerous places on Velixia. A deep, rapid-moving river filled with jagged rocks and strange creatures lurking beneath its dark waters. No Velmeri would dare cross it. But humans. Humans were insane. "Can you swim?" Lyra asked suddenly. Ethan, still catching his breath, raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Why?" Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because we're going to need to." Ethan followed her gaze, and when he saw the rushing river ahead, his face darkened. "You're kidding." Lyra shook her head. "It's the only way." The sound of footsteps was growing louder behind them. The hunters were near. They had no other choice. "Jump," Lyra commanded. Ethan hesitated for only a second before grabbing her hand. "Hold on." And then, together, they leaped. The river of shadows. The moment they hit the water, it was like being swallowed whole. The current was stronger than Lyra had expected. It yanked them downward, pulling them into darkness, cold, and chaos. Her lungs burned as she struggled to surface. She had never swum in such violent waters before. Ethan's grip tightened on her wrist. "Kick. Keep kicking," he shouted, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the roar of the river. For a moment, she thought they would be dragged under forever. But then, Ethan's strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her toward the surface. Lyra gasped for air, coughing as they broke through the waves. The river pushed them forward, carrying them far from the search party. The sound of Velmeri voices disappeared behind them. They drifted for what felt like forever before the river finally spat them out onto a muddy shore. Lyra collapsed onto the ground, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Ethan lay beside her, equally exhausted. For a long moment, they just lay there, staring up at the alien sky. Then, Ethan started laughing. Lyra turned her head toward him, glaring. "What's so funny?" Ethan grinned, his hair plastered to his forehead. "I just jumped into an alien death river. I think I might be losing my mind." Lyra blinked. Then, to her surprise, she felt something strange. A small smile tugged at her lips. It was the first time in her life that she had ever smiled. A new kind of fear. The moment didn't last long. Ethan pushed himself up, looking around. "Where are we now?" Lyra sat up, her gaze scanning the dense forest surrounding them. This was far beyond Velmeri territory. They were in uncharted lands, lands full of danger. But that wasn't what worried her. What worried her was what she felt inside. For the first time in her life, she had disobeyed everything she had been taught. She had defied her people, risked her own life for someone else. Not just anyone. A human. She had always been told that love was impossible. But as she looked at Ethan, at the way he smiled despite the madness of their situation, at the way his blue eyes held no fear, only trust, she felt something terrifying inside her. Something she was not supposed to feel. Something that could change everything. The price of breaking rules. Lyra had never been this far from home. The air in the uncharted lands was thick with mist, the towering trees bending in strange angles, their glowing vines pulsing like slow heartbeats. The night was silent except for the distant hum of unseen creatures, their presence a constant reminder that they were trespassing into dangerous territory. Ethan limped beside her, his breathing heavy. His body was still weak, his wounds not fully healed, but he didn't complain. "How much farther?" he asked, breaking the silence. Lyra didn't answer right away. The truth was, she didn't know. She had no plan, no destination, no idea how to survive outside of the structured world she had known all her life. But she couldn't tell Ethan that. She had made a choice to save him, and now she had to live with it. Lyra exhaled. "We need shelter." Ethan gave a small chuckle. "Yeah, I was hoping you'd say that." They pressed on, moving deeper into the forest, unaware that the Velmeri were not far behind. The weight of betrayal. Hours later, they found a hidden alcove within the roots of a massive tree, its thick vines curling around the entrance like protective arms. Lyra scanned the area, checking for threats, before leading Ethan inside. She knelt, pulling out a small vial of healing salve from her belt, and poured it over his wounds. Ethan winced but said nothing. "You're not used to people helping you, are you?" she murmured. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of saying I'm too stubborn?" Lyra tilted her head, considering it. "I was going to say reckless." Ethan smirked. "Same thing." Lyra didn't smile this time. Instead, she focused on wrapping his injured arm. Her mind was racing. What would happen next? The Velmeri were searching for them. If they were caught, Ethan would be executed on sight, and she would be punished in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. She had broken the most sacred law of her people. She had chosen a human over her kind. Why? Lyra wasn't sure of the answer anymore. Ethan sighed, resting his head against the tree bark. "So," he said, "what happens if your people catch us?" She hesitated. "They won't." Ethan gave her a knowing look. "That's not an answer." Lyra's fingers clenched into fists. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have never disobeyed before." Ethan's expression softened. "But you did. For me." She looked away. Something about the way he said it made her stomach tighten. Before she could respond, a distant sound echoed through the forest. A low, vibrating hum, one she recognized instantly. Velmeri scouts. Her blood turned cold. "They've found us," she whispered. "Hunted." Ethan sat up immediately. "How do they track us?" Lyra's mind worked fast. "My people are connected to the energy of the planet. Our movements leave a disturbance in the air. They can sense it." Ethan cursed. "Great, so they can just follow our footsteps." "Something like that." Lyra grabbed her satchel, her pulse quickening. "We have to move." Ethan struggled to his feet. "Are you sure you don't want to turn me in?" He gave her a teasing smirk, but there was something in his eyes, a question hidden beneath the joke. Lyra met his gaze, her heart pounding. "No," she said firmly. "I will not let them take you." Ethan's smirk faded. A moment passed between them, a moment neither of them understood. Then they ran. The trap. The night air was thick as they moved through the undergrowth, their breaths ragged. The glowing leaves around them swayed with an unseen force, as if the planet itself could sense their fear. Lyra led the way, her body tense, her senses sharp. She knew her people's tactics. They never approached directly. They set traps. They waited. And then she saw it, too late. The air shifted unnaturally to her right. A disturbance. "Ethan, stop." The ground beneath Ethan's feet collapsed. He let out a sharp gasp as he plummeted into a deep, hidden pit. Lyra lunged forward, grabbing his wrist just in time. Ethan dangled over the edge, gripping her arm tightly, his blue eyes wide. "Okay," he panted. "This is bad." Lyra's arms burned as she struggled to hold onto him. He was too heavy. And then they arrived. Velmeri hunters stepped out of the darkness, their tall, silver forms illuminated by the soft glow of the trees. Their eyes were unreadable, their expressions cold. Lyra's heart stopped. One of them stepped forward, Elder Varen. She had known him since childhood. He was a warrior, a leader, a man who saw weakness as a disease. And right now, he was looking at her as if she were already dead. "Lyra," Varen said, his voice calm, too calm. "Step away from the human." Her fingers tightened around Ethan's wrist. "No," she whispered. The hunter's expressions darkened. "You have broken the sacred law," Varen continued. "You have betrayed your own people." Lyra's chest rose and fell rapidly. She knew the punishment. There were no second chances. Ethan looked up at her, his blue eyes unwavering. "Let me go," he whispered. "Save yourself." Lyra felt something crack inside her. Let him go. After everything. After saving him, protecting him, running with him. The elders were wrong. Love wasn't weakness. Love was strength. And she would prove it. She looked up at Varen, her hands still gripping Ethan. "I will not let him die." Varen's face hardened. "Then you will die with him." Lyra made her choice. She pulled Ethan up with all her strength. The Velmeri hunters rushed forward. And the battle began. Love is strength. The air was thick with tension. Lyra stood at the edge of the pit, her fingers gripping Ethan's wrist, refusing to let go. The Velmeri hunters surrounded them, their glowing silver eyes emotionless, their energy weapons humming softly. Elder Varen took a slow step forward. His voice was calm. But his words were a death sentence. "You cannot win, Lyra. Surrender." Lyra's heart pounded. She had spent her entire life believing in the laws of her people, believing that love was weakness, that emotions destroyed minds, that attachments were dangerous. But now, her fingers were wrapped around something real. A human who had risked his life beside her. A man who had looked at her like she mattered. Ethan's grip tightened on her arm as she pulled him up with every ounce of strength she had. His boots scraped against the rocky edges of the pit, and for a moment, it felt as if he would slip back into the abyss. But then, with a final pull, he was beside her again. Ethan exhaled, his breath ragged, and met her gaze. "Remind me to never let you talk me into a plan again." Lyra almost smiled. Almost. Then Varin raised his weapon. "You have sealed your fate," the elder said coldly. Lyra knew what came next. The battle begins. The hunters attacked as one, moving in perfect synchronization, their bodies gliding effortlessly through the air. They weren't just warriors. They were predators, trained to eliminate anything that threatened the Velmeri way of life. Ethan pushed Lyra back, just as a bright energy bolt shot past her head, scorching the tree beside them. "Move," she hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him deeper into the forest. The moment their feet hit the ground, they ran. The trees blurred around them, glowing faintly in the dark. Lyra's mind worked fast. They couldn't outrun the hunters forever. The Velmeri didn't tire like humans. They had the ability to track movement through the energy of the planet itself. They needed a new plan. "Ethan," she gasped, "we have to split up." Ethan stopped running. "What?" "No." His voice was firm, his blue eyes sharp even in the dim light. "Not happening." Lyra's pulse pounded in her ears. "They're after me. If I distract them, you can escape." Ethan stepped closer. "And leave you behind." "No, that's not how this works." Lyra had no words. No one had ever refused to abandon her before. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the first hunter landed in front of them. A tall figure, clad in Velmeri combat armor, twin energy blades glowing at his sides. His silver eyes flicked toward Ethan, then back to Lyra. "You are not Velmeri anymore," he said. "You are a traitor." Lyra's blood turned to ice, the strength of a human. The hunter lunged forward. Lyra barely had time to draw her own blade before their weapons clashed, the force sending vibrations up her arms. She was fast, but the hunter was faster. Their blades sliced through the air, striking against each other with deadly precision. Lyra dodged left, right, twisting away from a lethal strike aimed at her heart. And then she heard Ethan, grunting in pain. She spun around just in time to see another hunter slam him into a tree, his body collapsing onto the ground. No. Without thinking, Lyra ran toward him, her chest tightening with something she had never felt before. Pure, unfiltered panic. She threw herself in front of Ethan, blocking the hunter's next strike with her blade. The hunter hesitated. "Move aside, Lyra," he said. "The human is not worth your life." Lyra gritted her teeth. She had spent her whole life being told that love was weakness. But if love was weakness, then why was it the only thing giving her strength now? She tightened her grip on the blade. "I won't let you kill him." For the first time, the hunter hesitated. "Then you have already chosen death," he said. Lyra smiled. "No," she whispered. "I've chosen to live." A battle of will. Suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed through the air. A command. A signal. The hunters stopped. Varin stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He studied Lyra, then Ethan, then the way she stood in front of him, protecting him, shielding him. "You would throw away your future," Varin murmured, "for this." Lyra's throat was dry, but she didn't waver. "Yes." Varin was silent for a long moment. Then he lifted his hand. The hunters stepped back, lowering their weapons. Lyra's breath caught. They weren't attacking. Varin studied her for a long, heavy moment before speaking. "There was once a time," he said, "when our ancestors believed that emotions could destroy us." His silver eyes met hers. "Perhaps we were wrong." Lyra's heart pounded. Was he letting them go? Varin's gaze flicked to Ithan. "Human," he said, "you have changed one of our own. That is no small thing." Ithan, still breathless from the fight, let out a short laugh. "Yeah, I have that effect on people." Varin's expression remained unreadable. Then finally, he nodded. "Go." Lyra could hardly believe it. The Velmeri didn't forgive. They didn't let things go. But somehow, she had changed something. She had proven that love wasn't weakness. It was strength. The road ahead. As Lyra and Ithan stepped beyond the reach of the Velmeri, the weight of everything crashed down on her. She could never return home. Her people would never see her as one of them again. She had given up everything. But as she turned toward Ithan, seeing the way he looked at her, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with trust, she realized something. She had found something greater than home. She had found a future. Ithan nudged her shoulder. "So, what now?" Lyra exhaled, looking up at the alien sky. "Now." She met his gaze. "Now we find our own way." And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The last trial. The sky above them stretched wide, a canvas of deep purple and silver clouds swirling softly over the alien landscape. A gentle wind brushed against Lyra's skin as she and Ithan moved beyond the borders of the Velmeri lands, stepping into the true unknown. Neither spoke for a long time. They had survived. But at what cost? Ithan exhaled, glancing at Lyra. "You okay?" She nodded, but in truth, she didn't know. For the first time in her life, she had no path, no orders, no home. She was Velmeri no longer. And yet, as she looked at Ithan, this impossible human who had changed her world, she felt something strange inside her. Not regret, not sorrow. Something new. A future she had never imagined. The road of exiles. They traveled for days, following the shifting landscapes of the uncharted lands. The terrain was unpredictable. Sharp cliffs, glowing rivers, dense alien jungles that whispered at night. But Ithan was used to surviving in harsh conditions, and Lyra had been trained to endure since birth. Together, they adapted. Ithan taught her how to make a fire without energy weapons. In return, she showed him how to listen to the land, sensing danger before it arrived. They moved as a team, wordlessly understanding when to rest, when to push forward, when to fight. But despite their silent rhythm, a question hung between them. Where were they going? Ithan was searching for his crew, but Lyra, she had nothing to return to. No family, no purpose. Was this how exile felt? A never-ending question with no answer. She tried not to let it show, but Ithan saw it anyway. "You don't have to act strong all the time, you know," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. Lyra glanced at him. "I am strong." Ithan smirked. "Yeah, I know, but strength isn't just about fighting." Lyra frowned. "Then what is it?" Ithan tossed a small rock into the fire, watching the embers glow. "I think strength is knowing you don't have to do everything alone." Lyra went silent. She had spent her whole life alone. Even among her people, she had always felt like an outsider. And now, here was a human who refused to let her be alone. She wasn't sure what to do with that. But before she could reply, the ground trembled beneath them, and then they heard it. A distant mechanical hum. Ithan stood up immediately. "That's not natural." Lyra's heart pounded. No, it wasn't. Something was coming. And it wasn't Velmeri. The ghosts of war. The sky flickered. A dark silhouette emerged from the mist, moving steadily toward them. Ithan cursed under his breath. "That's a ship." Lyra tensed. "Your people?" Ithan narrowed his eyes. "No, that's not a rescue ship. The vessel descended slowly, its hull covered in battle scars and faded insignias. The design was sleek, predatory, human, but not like Ethan's scouting crew. This ship was built for war. As it touched the ground, the doors hissed open, revealing figures in black armor. Ethan's face darkened. Pirates. Lyra had never seen humans like these before. They moved differently, cold, calculated, predatory. Their weapons were drawn before they even stepped off the ship. One of them, a tall man with a scar running across his jaw, studied Ethan with mild amusement. Well, he drawled. Look what we have here. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Captain Rourke. Lyra's breath caught. Ethan knew them. That was bad. Thought you were dead. Rourke continued, stepping forward. Your little ship went down, and we figured you'd burned up in the atmosphere. But look at you, alive, and keeping interesting company. His sharp gaze flicked to Lyra. Ethan moved instinctively, stepping between her and Rourke. She's with me, Ethan said, voice firm. Rourke smirked. I can see that. He took a slow step forward. So tell me, Ethan, why shouldn't I kill you right now? A choice of survival. Lyra's muscles coiled, ready to strike if needed, but Ethan didn't flinch. Because you need me, Ethan said simply. Rourke laughed. Do I? Ethan nodded. You don't know this planet. I do. And if you're here, it means you're looking for something. Rourke's smirk faded slightly. He didn't deny it. Ethan continued, I can help you find what you're looking for. In exchange, we go free. Lyra shot him a sharp look. What was he doing? Rourke studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Lyra. And what about you, alien girl? He mused. You willing to help a bunch of dangerous men if it means saving your little friend here? Lyra met his gaze without fear. I will help no one, she said coldly. But if you threaten him, I will end you. The air went still, and then Rourke laughed. A deep, amused chuckle. Oh, I like you, he said. Then he clapped his hands together. All right, Ethan, you've got yourself a deal. You help us find what we need, and when it's over, you and your alien can walk away. But, his eyes darkened. If you try to betray us, you'll both die. Understand? Ethan exhaled. Understood. Lyra's fingers twitched, her instincts screaming against trusting these men. But what other choice did they have? For now, they would play along. But Lyra knew one thing for certain. This was not over. And the final trial was yet to come. A new future. The pirate ship loomed in the distance, its metal frame a dark silhouette against the pale sky. Lyra had never seen a human warship up close before, and the sight of it sent a strange unease curling through her chest. Ethan walked beside her, his posture calm, but she could feel the tension in his body. They were playing a dangerous game. Captain Rourke and his crew of mercenaries didn't trust them, and Lyra didn't trust them either. They were killers, raiders, men who lived by no law except their own. The only reason they hadn't been executed yet was because Ethan had convinced Rourke they were useful. But Lyra knew the truth. The moment they stopped being useful, Rourke would kill them both. And she refused to let that happen. The game of deception. The pirates had a destination in mind, a hidden ruin buried deep within the planet's wilderness. Ethan had overheard them talking about it. Rourke was searching for something, an old human relic, lost after a war decades ago. The problem? Lyra had never heard of it, which meant they were being taken somewhere unknown. As they walked, Ethan whispered just low enough for her to hear, We're not actually going to help them find it. Lyra gave him a side glance. Obviously. Ethan smirked, but his expression was tight. Then we need a way out before they figure out we're stalling. Lyra's mind was already working. I might have an idea. She scanned their surroundings. They were being marched through an open clearing, the forest stretching on all sides. The pirate ship was parked behind them, their way off this planet. but it was heavily guarded. Their only option was to disappear into the wild, which meant they needed a distraction. And Lyra knew exactly how to create one. She glanced up at the sky. The moons were shifting position, signaling that the storm season was close. On this part of the planet, that meant one thing: nightfire storms. If they could lure the pirates into one of the storm zones, they might be able to escape. She nudged Ethan. "I hope you're ready to run." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That depends." "Run from what?" Lyra exhaled. "Something worse than pirates." Ethan sighed. "Why is it always something worse?" "The storm is coming." That night, as the pirates made camp, Lyra and Ethan waited. They sat near the edge of the group, their wrists loosely bound, not tightly enough to prevent escape, but enough to remind them they were prisoners. Rourke was speaking with his men, studying old data maps. He was distracted. "Good," Lyra whispered under her breath, her voice barely a breath of sound. "They don't know what's coming." Ethan followed her gaze to the distant horizon. Dark clouds were forming, glowing faintly with flickers of violet lightning. "Storm," he murmured. Lyra nodded. "Not just any storm, a nightfire storm. When it arrives, the air will become charged, igniting the trees. The sky will rain fire." Ethan stared at her. "Okay, that sounds bad." "It is," she said, "unless you know where to hide." Ethan's lips twitched into a small smile. "And let me guess, you do." She nodded. "All right," he said. "How do we make sure we're not stuck here when everything catches fire?" Lyra took a slow breath. "We need to break free and lead the pirates straight into it." Ethan smirked. "So, we're tricking them into running into a death trap." Lyra shrugged. "Call it a tactical advantage." Ethan chuckled. "I think I'm starting to like the way you think." She rolled her eyes. "Try to keep up." The escape. The plan was simple. At the first sign of the storm, they would break free and make it look like they were running for safety. The pirates, thinking they were escaping, would chase them straight into the danger zone. The moment the storm hit, chaos would erupt. And in that chaos, they would vanish. But first, they needed to get rid of their bindings. Lyra flexed her fingers, using the sharp edge of a hidden blade to slowly cut through the rope around her wrists. It took time, but she was patient. Ethan, meanwhile, had already loosened his. "Show off," she muttered. Ethan grinned. "It's a skill." Then, it began. The first bolt of nightfire cracked across the sky, splitting the clouds with a bright purple flash. The ground rumbled as the trees began to ignite, their leaves catching fire like dry paper. The pirates jumped to their feet, cursing. "What the hell?" Lyra moved. She grabbed Ethan's wrist and bolted into the burning forest. Instantly, Rourke roared. "Stop them! They're getting away." The pirates chased after them, blasters firing into the trees. Exactly what Lyra wanted. She and Ethan dodged past flames, weaving through the chaos. Behind them, the pirates followed, running straight into the firestorm. Then, Lyra made the final move. She veered hard to the left, grabbing Ethan and pulling him into a hidden underground cavern. The pirates, caught in the chaos, didn't see them disappear. By the time they realized it, it was too late. The storm swallowed them whole. A new beginning. Hours later, the world was quiet again. The storm had passed, leaving only ashes and glowing embers in its wake. Lyra and Ethan emerged from the underground shelter, stepping into the silent wasteland. The pirates were gone, their ship abandoned. Ethan let out a breathless laugh. That actually worked. Lyra smirked. Of course it did. Ethan shook his head. You're terrifying. You know that. She shrugged. You get used to it. Ethan laughed again, then looked toward the pirate ship. So, what do we do now? Lyra followed his gaze. They had a ship. They had freedom. For the first time in her life, Lyra wasn't bound by the rules of her people. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She looked at Ethan. "You wanted to find your crew," she said. "Now we can." Ethan nodded. And after that, Lyra took a slow breath, looking at the endless horizon. "After that, we go wherever we want." Ethan grinned. "I like the sound of that." And as they stepped onto the ship, a new journey began.